Good evening to you all, and welcome to this meeting, Housing and Community Select Committee. I'm Councillor Kasim Ali, the Chair of Housing and Community Select Committee, and I'm chairing the committee meetings. The event, this meeting is being streamed live on YouTube, so that the members of the public can follow the discussion as it's taking place in the council. So may I welcome everyone here to Committee Room 1 at the Kensington Chelsea Town Hall. And the meeting is going to start, but before we do anything, we will start the meeting with 72 seconds to remember those we have lost at Grenfell Tower disaster. Good chat. Thank you. We'll start with apologies. Thank you. We have the full committee as we speak, so there is no apology. We go for the A2, declaration of interest. Anyone wishes to declare an interest relevant to this meeting? I'll take that as a no. Thank you. We go to now A3, the minutes of the last meeting, 29th of June 2022, right at the council AGM. May I start this with Councillor Guardian, who has me kindly to flag some issues at the minutes. Councillor Guardian.
Hi, thank you. Yes, it was on A5 in the last bullet point. I think it's wrong to say that was a member's request. It was a colleague's request, and so perhaps that could be amended into something a bit more generic.
So to be sure about this, it's not about the members as a holistic, it's a member's request without naming a member.
Correct.
Thank you.
And then I also had a question on A6, the first bullet point. I think quite a few of this committee wasn't serving when the paper A6 had come. So it was a January 2022 and then it was a March 2022. So I know for one, it was very hard to comment because I hadn't been at that meeting. But certainly I think it would be helpful to say, because it looks like those are members' comments, but I feel that the first bullet point was actually member feedback from the residents panel, whereas it actually says that the members felt that the training was inadequate. Certainly I, as hadn't been a member in January or indeed in March, felt that I couldn't possibly comment on the community leadership programme. But I think it may also go a step further, that I don't know actually if indeed those who did were actually reflecting the comments of the residents as opposed to personal comments.
Thank you. I think that's a general comment. Councillor Hammond will welcome him to speak after me if he wishes to add one more. But speaking of the members' request, it refers back to those who were present. I believe now we had this discussion, but I did not flag this issue here. I believe it's referring to those who were present at the time for the meeting for the community housing communities, rather than those who are now members. And that is one thing to put. And obviously, if there was an evidence looking for something has been said, referring to that committee, it goes back to who was actually members of the committee. And speaking of the meeting, I believe it's important to remember that January this year we were not part of the council. Obviously, we were the council before, but we were not at this time. So I think it's generic to say that is the case. So perhaps maybe we can make that distinction. Is it?
Absolutely. Councillor Rossi.
Councillor Rossi. Yes.
I was at the meeting and that was the impression I got.
Okay.
So, I mean, from my point of view, this is accurate,
Okay.
but I understand what Joanna is saying.
Thank you. So the members at the time will be the right to strike. Is that all agreed? Yeah. Yeah. Just to make that. Anyone else? Thank you. In that case, I will sign the minutes as correct. A4, the cost of living, the first agenda item, and may I welcome the new director of housing, the new director of communities, I should say. I kept saying housing has been in my head for ever since. More welcome to the council and welcome to Kensington and Chelsea Council. I'm sure you will enjoy working here and hopefully stay with us for a long time. The cost of living is an agenda item that has been talked about and it's really currently on the news, rightly, simply because of our residents, not only here in the borough, but everyone who's connected to Kensington and Chelsea felt the pressure, and the whole country indeed feels the cost of living crisis. So it was timely agenda, and the report is well written, I must say. That is also well done to officers who've been putting the time and effort. So I will now welcome the lead member for communities, Councillor Soft McVeigh, and relevant officers. Anyone who's director, you can also join. Would be good. As tradition is, we do ask questions and hold accountable for the lead members. Senior officers can support, but we do hold accountable for lead members, and I think that's important for councillors to scrutinise the policy makers rather than we're doing the admin work or even the senior officers. So it's important to have that decision. To welcome. Well, this is also affects the housing team rather than just communities. So, Councillor Tyler Smith and Councillor McFay, welcome, and anyone who wants to start.
Shall I kick off?
Please.
Cost of living. So, this is something that's keeping me and a lot of other people up at night. It's obviously, a massive worry for us. In paragraph 5.9, you can see that we're really referring to a cost of living increase, which has gone up in terms of the number, 10% of people who are coming up below the poverty line. If there's any comfort from that, we can say that 75% of those are single people. They're not families, but families are impacted and affected by the cost of living increase. Up until August, again, if you look at the overall increase, we can see that these numbers really referring to a period up to August. Obviously, this doesn't take into account the energy bill that we've now seen and obviously what government initiatives are coming through. And I suppose if there is any comfort at the moment, we haven't seen this in terms of the cost of living increase impacting in payments. We're still collecting 98% of the rental payments from our residents, but we are anticipating obviously things are going to go and get a lot tougher. Within paragraph 6.3, we've set out a number of initiatives that we on the housing side will be looking to implement in order to mitigate this in terms of impact, maximisation, and I think one of the important areas for us is that we do have our own housing, limited housing fund within housing, and we now know obviously that there is government support coming through to the council, and it's important for us to link up with the rest of the council in terms of how that's best to be delivered. But I think everything else is explained within the pound. I think I'll probably just reference again fuel. Fuel is a big worry for us. We have a fixed contract which will expire in April next year. So we're going to see obviously a significant increase in terms of our cost of fuel. And that although the current payments are anticipated to go from £13 to could be paying about £20 a week, that figure of £7 obviously is very significant to low income families, and we have to ignore So I've got really nothing further to add. Well, I'm looking at Doug to say if
There's a few more pieces in
Please
here in terms of we also have a housing and employment service. Because obviously maximising people's income during this period is absolutely essential. And the resources are reasonably large. We are seeing an upturn in demand, obviously, during this period. So we need to think about what we do with that as we move forward, because I suspect we're going to have to try and keep pace with it. The only other thing I would add is the actual outcomes and from what we're dealing with at the moment change almost on a daily or weekly basis depending on what's happening. And so once we've got a lot of staff that are looking at what we can do here locally, we're also speaking to colleagues across London just about what they might be doing. And while fuel prices have sort of gone a bit like that, we're not quite sure what they're going to be. So it's about making the right decisions at the right time. And this is quite fluid. I think this is a snapshot of where we're at today. If we come back in a few months, it'll probably look slightly different.
Thank you. We will start the question. I thought we would do the housing communities together, but if you want to ask questions, please go ahead.
Yeah, and just to clarify something, the £400 that we all get, when I had my notice yesterday, people who have communal heating, people who have heating as part of their building, as part of their rent, do they get that £400? What happens?
Yes, they will have they will have their own electricity or some provider, because we provide the heating, but they also have other services. We don't provide all the services to their property, so it will come in on their bill, whichever their provider is.
But if you're providing the heating, then how are they getting the subsidy?
It's done through the supplier, and they still have a connection. So there was a view that this might be excluded, but it's not. That's what I'm told. So I will 100% double check that, but that's what I've been advised. But if it's wrong, I'll make an amendment to that. But that's my understanding, because they've got a connection on electric. They've got a bill that they have to pay for that it will come to.
Yes, please.
So can I just clarify that? If an occupant is paying their electric bill, but they have a communal system for heating and hot water, then the council or the freeholder will purchase that on a commercial basis, and they run domestic electric bills.
Absolutely.
For common area lighting, heating, hot water, that really.
And lots of our systems some of them are just heating only, just to add through it. So it creates.
So not heating hot water.
No, varies. Some are part heating, just to even complicate it further. But so that is my understanding. I will go away and check that, because I don't want to misinform. That's.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Can I ask about figures? So I have to admit, I was surprised that some of the figures were lower than I was expecting in terms of the local picture. Where do we get our figures from? And for example, the low income family tracker, I was expecting that to be much higher in terms of the So how do we identify, and how do we work out if anybody's missing, or indeed how do we connect with people who can't come into the counselling units? So I'm probably asking, it's as much communities as it is for housing, but those people who are under the radar, so to speak, how do we pick them up into our figures, and how do we help them?
So these aren't necessarily people coming to us. This is based on the sharing of data across a number of organisations. So that's how the low income family tracker works. And that gives us then the ability to target our services at people we think are at risk. And that's what we do, because we know what their income is, what their family circumstances are, and whether there's any other vulnerabilities that we need to address. So that's how it works. And we pay for that privilege, a small amount of money, but to share that data. And actually, it's really helped us, certainly when we've looked at maximising pension credit for the people who are elderly. we've done quite a bit of work and we've maximised people's income out to that. So whether there are people whose, I mean, I suppose that the main point is everyone's affected by the cost of living crisis, and that threshold may vary, and we may need to look at that as we go forward. But for people who are on lower incomes, that detail is there, so it covers everyone that's in a council property. I'm unclear how it works.
So I suppose I was surprised at a 9% decrease in the number of households in food poverty. That was a figure that I would expected to increase, not decrease.
Yes.
Because certainly people have been talking about less gifts to food banks, and more people being pushed into relying on food banks, and yet you're seeing a decrease, which just didn't sit right with my expectation of that.
I don't know the technicalities of what goes into that fuel, because also you've had conversely an increase in fuel poverty. So ultimately, you're in, if you can't, it is either food, fuel, rent is really the dilemmas that are facing people. So for us, all this is telling me is that we've got a lot of people who are affected by this.
But just to follow up with that, I think the importance is where do you get the data from? That is, it's important because as Councillor Gardner mentioned, it's data that informs us, obviously informs you. So how do you get that data? It's not something else. Where do you get it from?
So I'm not an expert on how the data is pulled together,
Okay.
but we're not the only people that use the low income family tracker system. So it's got across a number of boroughs, and it's quite known. So I can provide that to the committee as to how it actually pulls data together and provides this information.
Yeah, that would be good. How they collect the data, how it's being done. Because sometimes people may not be reached. For those who collect the data, for us to be a data obviously collected, but not reaching out to the people who are in need the council in our residents. So I think it's important to do that. Thank you for making that offer. Well, while we're at it, I just want to ask you about 5.9, as you mentioned, 10% of the household below the poverty line now. Is there any chance you could tell us, let's say the council tax, for those people who are below the poverty line, will they get automatic council tax? A reduction 100%? Because the council at one point was supporting with the council tax. So how can you support those? Are they getting 100% council tax? Just for a question. Are they getting a support with their council tax, whereas those who are 10% below the poverty line? How are we supporting them?
So does the council have because the council has discretion to not
That's
charge
right,
people?
yes.
I don't know what we do in this borough in terms of
In terms of council tax to a discount.
Yes. You have that.
I'm just looking at the appendix,
Okay.
which was something actually we discussed before. On page 20 of the appendix about the council tax reduction scheme.
Yeah.
I don't have the exact figures of that actually, but I know it's one of the more generous ones in London.
Yes.
And we do it, and it costs council 14 million. And we support 88,500 people, 1,500 people. So I'm not sure exactly whether it's 100%, but we can get that to you.
That would be great if we can get this supported so we know exactly how they support it. If there's any other, is there any question? Yes, Councillor. Of course. Yes.
Yes, I think on with regard to that last very important point, probably the lead member of the finance is the right person to ask to answer it with all the detail. And I can see his predecessor smiling back because she possibly knows the answer from last year, but of course won't be able to give an up-to-date answer, nor should she give an answer on that. But I think there will be a detailed answer.
I think that's what we need.
Available. I mean, looking through the paper, there's an impressive amount of help available in general terms in these difficult times, and I commend the council for those bits that are within the responsibility. And I also just mention, as they mentioned in the paper, the Nucleus Advice Centre, paragraph 10.1, because I visited them in the summer, and they do excellent work. I've referred a couple of or two or three constituents to them over the last year or so, and for the most part, I think they've had very good answers very good support. And I know there are other organisations around the borough that do exactly the same thing, but Nicholas is the one that's closest to my ward, so I'll put on record my gratitude to them as they mentioned in the paper. On the specifics, we've already been in paragraph 5.9. I was wondering, and please remind me, Kim, what's the definition of food poverty and fuel poverty? I know it's something like proportion of income spent on food or fuel, but given that it's used in your paper, could you spell that out, please? And then
the short answer is that it is a very complicated. It takes average. It takes all sorts of various calculations in terms of. Well, if I look at in terms of deprivation, issues in terms of how average earnings, etc., etc. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the exact calculation as to where you draw the line that constitutes poverty, but I believe it's something to do with average earnings.
I mean, there is one that's used in the newspapers that say another journalism, which is a proportion of income, which is probably a shorthand for the complex calculation that you're describing, but it is used in your papers. So I think perhaps we could have a written.
Yes, we can give you a written in
on
terms
that.
of how it defines it, but I understand it's to do with average income.
Yes, I think it is as well, but I'm just wondering what exactly it is, and then a couple of lines above poverty line. I'm wondering what that is as well, because that can be measured in all sorts of different ways. So I'm wondering what we're.
Well, I think it goes back to the point of the chairman, actually, a lot of these statistics in terms of how they're quoted. I think for the committee to have a better understanding of how they're calculated
Yes,
would be really helpful.
I think that would be helpful. And then on the statistics, I know 6.2, you mentioned the collection rate of 98.3%. I think sounds to me extremely impressive, but even more impressive is the 101.8% you referred to in the second line as the previous figure.
So that's your rent plus any arrears that were outstanding at the previous year. So we actually, the year before, we collected more than we raised in charges.
Because it was rental collection.
Because it was actually the level of arrears came down.
Yeah, we were coming out of COVID where we had a slowdown as well. So
And at the start of COVID, it went up.
So would you regard 98% as a good figure then for a typical year? Or?
I think if we ended on 98% in a normal year, no, I wouldn't. You'd want to be probably 99, 1.5, 100 usually people into your staying at least in us. But we've just done some, we've just had some discussions with some of the other London boroughs, informal, and we're doing better than a number of those in terms of some have seen very sharp rises in mid there.
Well, thank you, Doug, and I'm glad you're aiming high. And just on to paragraph 8.3, two more. I mean, the last line you're talking about tough choices ahead. And your timeline for making tough choices, Kim, are we talking about next year's council budget? Is that what you're aiming at, really, with this?
Well, I mean, obviously we've been focusing predominantly on HRA account, which I think is explained in the report, is in a difficult position. We've had council rent increases for the last 2 years, because prior to that we had 4 years of freeze, and now we have the prospect of a cap of 5%, which in itself is a lot of money, but compared to where annual inflation is running at the moment, is obviously less than half. I mean, we've contributed and commented on the cap. We believe that it's important the council has freedom and to manage this process, bearing in mind that we would do so in a very careful way. But it's going to be a tricky situation for us. And the flip side of that, obviously, we're spending a lot of money on our properties. You've got potential impact in terms of interest costs of doing that, so we might have to face things on a different way. But at the moment, it's fair to say it's incredibly fluid. As far as the wider council issue is concerned, again, we've been spending a lot of time over the last couple of weeks, reviewing overall council budgets and looking at how we can ensure that we can deliver again a sound budget. That will be something which will come forward in due course.
Just one other.
Sure, of course, yeah.
Just going to the table at the back, which is a very useful table. Thanks to both departments for creating it. And here's just an example. Bottom of page 23 on the hand side business support, where it's got the costs line. The cost is NA. But yet, surely there is a cost, because the cost in these cases where there's no NA, in most cases, it's the support is being provided by council officers, and therefore there is a cost because we pay the salaries. So what proportion of the officer's time is spent on the whatever the listed activity is, and therefore how much does the council spend on whatever the activity is? There's quite a few examples we have, I just picked on that one because it's a it's easy to find.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I think that we asked for all the council help for the cost of living to be brought into one table, so we can see where it is. But as Kim mentioned earlier on, the linking between the departments is really important here. And right now we probably haven't got down into the granular detail of how many officers are specifically answering questions specifically related to the cost of living, because sometimes they're so complicated and diverse that it's all kind of caught up with other existing issues and concerns. But we'll see if we can get a bit more information about that. But I wouldn't have thought it would be hugely granular on that. But you're right, it should still be a ballpark cost.
I mean, it's more for your own understanding as an executive to know what you're spending your budgets on, and if the officers are doing X activity, they're not doing Y activity because they're doing X.
Yeah.
You need to understand that. So I'll leave it there because I think it's more important.
No, thank you. And just while we're talking about this whole appendix at the back, the 4 pages of it, and Kim mentioned earlier on, to just kind of segue into the community side of it. And I think I've mentioned before, probably in this committee, if not in the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, about the main landing page on the website, which signposts residents to the help provided, because that's one of the concerns we get quite often. It's like, well, I know there's help out there, but how can I access it? And I know Maura's been working really hard with cross-cutting department communications and getting everyone on board. So if someone brings up that council tax issue, we also know that the voluntary sector community fund could potentially help them, or there's the homework, or there's free school meals, or so it's much more, officers know what everything that other officers are doing.
Absolutely, and we're working to make sure that we have a seamless offer, so that wherever people go for information, they can get access information about whatever is available. So whether they go to the BCS with the council, that information is going to be available for them. So we're working very closely with the sector to develop a programme that supports residents who need help through the cost of living crisis. So we have provided, as mentioned in the reports, we have provided £150,000 to Canister and Chelsea Social Council to organise and provide infrastructure support for the various organisations that are providing. Firstly, it was around food support, but we've moved on to cost of living support more broadly. So we're working very closely with the sector to try and make sure that everything is integrated and seamless for those who need the help.
Thank you. We'll come more further details to Councillor Simmons.
Thank you. Just following on from that point, if you remember during COVID-19...
Sorry, Councillor
Yes.
Simmons, are you asking about the cost of living in terms
Yes,
of
I am.
the communities or the housing?
At the moment, communities.
Oh, they will give us a short, in a minute, they will give us more reports.
So we're not talking about...
Yes, we will do. I was just giving more advice to the housing team. So if you have a housing questions, communities have not given us summary of their reports, if you don't mind.
So we're not talking about
We-
the appendices that we've
We
been
are,
talking
we
about.
are. In a way, my apologies. I shouldn't have allowed the questions asked. My apologies. May I welcome you to have a summary of your report, and then I will start with Councillor Simmons.
Thank you, Councillor Allen. Sorry, I did kind of segue into it in answering Councillor Hammond's question. So I think the report is pretty self-explanatory. As Maura said, we actually asked the Canister and Chelsea Social Council to pivot their work to look at the cost of living crisis. We've been completely aware it's been coming up for many, many months. And so we've been working very hard behind the scenes to coordinate everything. And so to provide a united front. There's still a lot to do. We're still talking about, if we do get a massive cold snap, where will our warm places be? We're sure that libraries will come in. But also, I think as a council, our work with the voluntary and community sector is really good. I think there's very good ties. There's some fantastic community voluntary organisations out there, and our officers work very closely with them. And as a council, we really rely on them too, and they deliver a lot of our services. So I think for the upcoming winter, I think we are, with our voluntary area, we're in quite a good place, I would say, to know where we can target.
Absolutely. Yes, and in terms of the work that we're doing with our advice partnership, they are obviously out there with the contracts and the grants, and they're providing support not only in terms of dealing with the cost of living crisis, but also supporting people into employment, supporting people to help themselves through the crisis. In terms of Kennington and Chelsea Social Council, we are trying to implement quite a new way of working and supporting people who might have difficulties through this time by organising a programme of events to help people to come out of their homes so that they're not spending their resources heating their homes, but are in warm community settings, so that they are getting support not only in the community setting in terms of warm places, but also we'll be providing support around debt advice and advice on housing, advice on council tax within those settings. And we're hoping to put on a programme that is non-stigmatising, working with Kennington and Chelsea Social Council. There's also the Cash First programme, which is run through Kennington and Chelsea Foundation, but is also run through, that is provided through a number of organisations within the community to provide cash to people that need immediate support to help them through the crisis, and provide them with advice as well to support them through this period of time. So there are a number of programmes that we are supporting the sector through, either through funding or programmes that they are delivering independent of the council. So we do have to acknowledge that actually there's a lot of work going on within the sector that the council isn't necessarily funding, and we're trying to coordinate all of that and make it a cohesive whole offer for the borough.
Thank you. May I now start with councillors? Civics, please. And my apologies, I should have said that in the beginning, but please, fire away.
So I was just going to say regarding the coordination of the offer. If you remember in COVID-19, there was a hub which had a phone number, a dedicated phone number that people could ring. That's like a one-stop shop. And I think seeing what's on the website, most of it is signposting, some of it's a little bit complicated or a bit confusing, and of course not everybody is online, as the council is aware. So I was just wanting to put forward as a suggestion, I think I've mentioned it elsewhere as well, what about a phone line specifically for cost of living, because the help that's available, there's a lot of it, and it's sort of in different bits and with different eligibility for different groups. So a phone line would be really helpful, I think, rather than, or as well as making sure that different departments and different agencies have the same information to share. That was just one very quick point. And I wanted to ask on page 23, following on from Councillor Hammond, where it says food insecurity, and I think we all know it's food poverty, where it says the numbers supported, it says signposting by RBKC. And I was just wondering, we do have, I think you mentioned, the report mentions that there have been some interviews with emergency food providers that give an idea of numbers and also sort of other vulnerabilities. So I just wasn't sure if that was what that means, signposting by RBKC. Does it mean we don't know the numbers? Because it's not all signposting by RBKC, but people who access the food support.
We can find out the numbers by speaking with the organisations. The information that we have is not up to date at the minute, so we need to go back to the sector to get those figures that are more up to date, and we can report back to the committee.
Thanks.
What information.
Because it says NA for a lot of the other items, whereas I suppose for the others there are some specific numbers mentioned. And I guess that's because you know the size of the group that it's geared towards. And I just wanted to make one sort of more generalish point, and I'm not completely sure if this is just for communities or if it also applies to housing. Under 5.7, it's really good to see the council acknowledging the needs of single households and the numbers of them. And I just wanted to sort of gently make the point that this is something, I think there's a lot in this report, including that point, which perhaps the Grenfell recovery could benefit from that learning, because there's quite a lot here that's been glaringly missing from Grenfell recovery so far. So I think the learning that we have from COVID and now from this crisis, perhaps could that be applied going forwards in future strategy and plans for Grenfell recovery, and in particular for North Kensington. And also, just going a bit off topic, the help and support that's been available for refugees. It's really excellent, but it slightly puts what the council has done as regards Grenfell recovery into the shade. And I think that's a bit of a shame. I'm sure we can do better.
We'll take that away. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you. 2 points. On 8.2, you talk about the national consultation being carried out about social rent relief. Have we got a formal response that we're putting in? And would you like to share it with us? Or indeed, has this come to the committee before?
Yeah, submitted response in terms of the consultation is concerned. Well, this is on the 5% cap.
It does talk about options as well. Sorry, it says yeah.
I was going to say,
No answers. So the deadline is this week, and the council's position, which we said earlier, was that we feel that we should be able to decide locally, not have it imposed, because we're responsible for balancing the housing revenue. That isn't to say that we wouldn't bring in a lower than inflation increase, but with the view from that is that actually we should discuss that with our residents as to the wider financial picture that this creates. So if you're not getting more rent, then you can't spend as much. It upsets the business quite considerably. So you want to have a discussion about that. That's what we said in our response.
Is that response that's had with other councils? Did you have that as a discussion, or is this just?
So this is a discussion here. There will be a London Council response.
and certainly I went to the London Council discussion, and this was one of the items of the agenda. It's fair to say that it's a London. We should be allowed to have that flexibility with the council rather.
Right. Thank you. Very good response. And then the other one is paragraph 6.3. They're here to help leaflets. I think the second bullet point. It'd be really helpful if we could have an electronic version as councillors, because we could then share it with residents. And also, I wonder to what extent we actually share the help to here to help leaflets with residents associations. You sort of think about pyramid effect. I think it would really help.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of questions. Again, going to 6.3, I just want to pick up on the savvy shopper bus point. I mean, first of all, it just struck me when reading it, it's a little bit dystopian that residents would have to board bus and travel significantly outside the borough, say to Hounslow, to go to Iceland or low-cost supermarket. Are there really no alternative options? Because that we do have significant support in the borough for ensuring that those people can actually access that low-cost shopping in borough.
So it's very much about which shops are partaking in the scheme. That's what it's out about. I can go back and ask that question from people who are responsible for organising.
Perfect. And then just my second question is, in terms of the total spend on everything per capita, do we have any idea how that compares to other neighbouring boroughs, so Westminster, Hampstead and Fulham?
Not at the moment. I think that sort of thing will become clearer as people's policies and evolve at the present moment in time. When I met with some other London boroughs as part of London councils, we're very much in the thinking. We're doing this, but there's more to come, and there's more thinking that's happening. As I say, maybe this is something you might want to 2 or 3 months' time, 2 meetings' time, just so that we can come back on that. Whether we have the figures about what we're spending, whether people will be willing to share their figures is up to them, but we can try.
Thank you.
Councillor Long.
Yes, for communities, page 25, you've mentioned, I have to say I'm really pleased to see this in there, warm spaces, places, community hubs, Muncie Valley to be confirmed. Can you give us a bit more information about this? I have to say, I volunteer about the food banks in Stanley Ward, and it's the #1 question that we're getting at the moment, people are worried about. So I'm very keen to hear if there's any more detail and bones for that particular point.
Yeah, well, thank you for your question, and thank you for your service to the community. Thank you. I went down to Smart the other day, which has a food bank and also a food kitchen, community kitchen. And they're very aware actually that they're going to do more community cooking and community hot meals rather than the food banks. Because they find that people actually want to come in and have a contact and sit with someone, or you can often pick up lots of issues or concerns there with other advice agencies there. So that's the model that I know that they're looking more towards. So I can't speak about some of the other areas, but that would incorporate the kind of a warm space for people who already feel that this is a safe place for them to go, and it's trusted place, because they do hear a lot of mental concerns about that particular one. We are looking at our own council buildings, aren't we? We're looking at, making sure the libraries are open and warm and available. And even some of the buildings here, I believe, the property team are looking at, how can we make the service centre more open, even on other floors in here if need necessary. And our community and our voluntary sector that we work with, the charity works, we asked them that the other day, and they said it hasn't come up yet, but I think that was before there was a cold snap week before last, wasn't there? So that suddenly focused everyone's mind, and then suddenly it's gone warm again. But I think that is something that we are asking, and we're very much being led by what we're hearing from the community. That sounds bad.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
And where is the best place to get this information from?
Well, there you go. Well, but because we have a very, very good officer working group with the voluntary sector. In fact, they had a good big roundtable meeting here not so long ago, and you had so many local charities in there, all speaking together and networking, which is wonderful. So it will probably cascade down through that.
So is there going to be like a leaflet that all the volunteer sectors are going to have to give out, or the food banks, or is it the churches, or is it via the website?
It'll probably be a little bit more kind of less official than that. Probably it'll probably be this church hall will be open, this community centre will be open, this council will be open, and we'll try to coordinate that as best as we can. But I think it'll probably be along those lines.
Yeah, it'll be along those lines, more informal, more organic. But also, you mentioned Canister and Chelsea Social Council, what we're doing with them, they will also be a channel through which we will get this information out to residents. There may be some information also on our website under the cost of living hub as well about what's going on.
Yeah. We'll definitely always update the website, but I worry it's so easy to say, oh, check the website. And I think actually when things are so fast moving, often the people on the ground are the ones that know the best.
Yeah.
And they're actually speaking to people who are in need on the ground.
I just think my experience is they have a little, like a card with a piece of paper in your area. These are the areas identified, so they know, and they wouldn't even always go to the same one. And my follow-up question was something slightly different, not to forget the homelessness winter, because it's going to be a bigger problem than we probably experienced before. I know that my local church is actually cooking and going out to the homeless with food along High Street. Could you give us a little bit of an outline of what's being supported for the homeless this year?
Sorry.
This kind of comes in between
That's
the
good.
two of
Also,
us.
in terms of our rough sleepers,
Yeah.
obviously our reach team go out every week. We know we have thankfully a very small number. Kojo, how many? 20?
Oh, no, it's less than that now, it's about
11. So we know all of them effectively, and those that want support, we will obviously give support to. People don't want to go into hostels. And if you remember, there was a government initiative last time about actually putting hotels. So I would feel that we will be doing our bit.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I wonder if you could say something about the cash first scheme, because it, I understand it's the Kensington Chelsea Foundation who are administering it, but who exactly is eligible? Is the 130k from us? Yeah, and how do people access it? Whose sides? If you're going to get cash first.
Well, we've both met separately with the Kensington and Chelsea Foundation, Victoria Todd there, which is a fantastic organisation, and they work directly. They have the kind of the authority to be discretionary about this. Right, yeah.
Yes, so they administer the funds through 4 of our advice partners. The eligibility is the person discusses with the organisation what their circumstance is, and then they get cash at that point. The £130,000 actually was money that we got through COVID, and we were able to change the use of that so that we could provide that support.
And the advice agencies that Maura mentioned there, Citizens Advice, Wenner, Nucleus, and North Kensington Law Centre. So again, all really well connected, well established groups in the community, which the council also supports. It's a little bit confusing actually on page 15, and it slightly implies that just the GLA fund those, but the council does as well.
So people could just turn up at the KMC Foundation or Citizens Advice, whatever, and actually just say I need some cash, and they will get cash. Is that
One of the situations Victoria explained to me was if someone sadly has just lost their job and before universal credit kicks in, actually you need cash for that period of time, and so they will look into all those kind of scenarios.
But it's a kind of anyone can self-refer.
Yes, but
if,
then
if
there are
they're
checks and
desperate
balances.
or whatever.
Mhm.
Okay.
But there are checks and balances.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Simmons. Sure. Just to recap, before we summarize what we've just talked about, I want to go back to the issue of cost of living crisis, specifically food and energy security. Cost of living crisis, they started some of our residents way before this year, 2020, 2021. You recall, we're not this at that, but in February 2021, we invited, I think about 17 food banks, and some of the issues they were raising at the time was a transport issue, where they have food in one place, they cannot transport to another place. I remember Councillor Soph Bay have supported initiative to get a parking plan for some of the food banks to transfer food from one place to another. Can you update us on that front, please? If there anything has been done about the parking issue, the transport issue?
Yes, I was discussing this actually the other day with the lead member for planning, who covers all the permits, Councillor Kamali, and he said it was an incredibly important need during COVID for that, because of the restrictions of people's ability to move themselves. He was saying it's probably going to be a little bit more complicated putting that in right now, and he was saying where does it stop? Where do we draw the line? So we are still discussing this.
I think,
But I have not had anyone directly approach me apart from in your committee last time when it came up, but that was much more related to COVID.
yes.
Correct me if I'm.
I haven't had anyone raise this so far.
But we will keep our ears open to
But
this.
the issue of COVID was directly related to the food crisis,
Yes.
or food insecurity, or food security for this reason. And I think it's still the issue stands, whether it's COVID or out of COVID, and I think it would be good to get to the lead member to say this food security has been ongoing since 2020 and before some of our for some of our residents, and the issue still stands. So if we can get that support with food bank providers and leaders whom we have to thank for their good work, that would be great. And yes, Councillor Simmons. I'll
I
summarize.
think, what you say is completely correct. Kensington Chelsea Food Bank opened in Notting Hill in 2018, so this has been ongoing for some time. And I was just wondering whether Councillor Kamali is aware of the logistics behind food distribution, because it's one thing being able to deliver to vulnerable people, but actually, where do you get the food from? Because that food has to be collected from somewhere. And without that, it's really putting a sort of bottleneck on what these services can provide. And as we can see in the report, the need is increasing, not decreasing, even though food poverty is going down according to the lift. I don't know how. The numbers are going up, and it's only going to get worse. So there needs to be infrastructure, and I see we've given some funding to KCSC about the infrastructure. There needs to be infrastructure for getting food from those places who donate it, from Waitrose or wherever, needs to be got to the food banks to be able to distribute. And that I think has been an issue for quite a few of them for a while. So perhaps that could be impressed on this level.
Excellent.
We'll take
Thank
that
you
away.
very much indeed. To summarize
you.
the points, thanks. The last point that almost Councillor North had mentioned, but in terms of profit sleepers, I'm sure the churches and the mosques and synagogues will open their doors again this winter, and I thank them for their community service, not only for faith but also to support food with shelter during tough times. And hopefully, part of Almanar trustee, Almanar has been doing it for some time, and probably will do it again. So I hope to see the complete number of communities visiting faith centres and providing the service that they need to make sure that they can actually support our residents. And just to summarize of what we've talked about, I think it's a bit unusual to say the lead members, so in this case, more the housing, to at least 4 or 5 points to say we're taking away, and we'll come back to you, such as the council tax support, the poverty line measurement, and how the measure has been used, and how the data has been collected, data has been used. Obviously, food insecurity is another one, and communication, Councillor Simmons mentioned in terms of the support of the and whether it's phone lines or any other way we can connect. So all these points will be outstanding, and hopefully we'll get from you. And thank you for your time and the report. Now I will, before I move from this agenda item, I would like to call Moira Samuel. For Moira is a resident who's been supporting our community for so long, and she knows from first-hand experience from the resident that she's been supporting. Please do come and give us, if you have any questions, or if you want to talk 5 minutes, the platform is yours.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's gosh, it's been quite difficult listening to all of this evening. I think we've all been aware. I think Councillor Simmons has pointed out the question of food poverty. You know, the community's gone through Grenfell, COVID, pandemic, and now we're in a cost of living crisis. And I think for me, it's quite shocking to hear the extent to which we have normalised food poverty in this borough. We talk quite normally about food banks as if they've just been part of the environment for decades. And I think in one of the richest boroughs in the country, that's quite shocking, and we need to think about why this has happened and how come we've got ourselves into, I say we, you know, this council is in this particular situation. And I think, I mean, there's so much information. I think it's really useful that you've put down some data. That's helpful for us. But I would ask the question when this data was collected, because my experience is that actually there are families, single-parent families, who your data suggests that the majority of people in low income in the borough are single households, but I think the majority of low income family are single households with children, and that's who we need to be focusing on. And I concur with what everyone says about access to information. I think that's absolutely significant. I think what we've gone through as a borough means that actually this is one area that we really do need to get right, because I think it would be absolutely shameful if we see mass evictions, increase in homelessness, an increase in crime, because that's what happens when people don't have any food. And so I think it's really, really significant that the North Kensington and the South Kensington community, where there is need, that this information is made available and really, really clearly, you know, and that you do. I mean, somebody talked about what's the cost for the council. Sorry, I'm sitting here listening and I can't hear council involved very much. All I'm hearing is the voluntary sector, you know, who are picking up a lot of the actual work to do. So I think that actually it would be great if the council can really give complete and utter support to the voluntary sectors that are working to support the communities, all the different organisations. But what I would feel from what we've just talked about, and I know maybe this is not cost of living, but it's housing, that we need to see, I think, some kind of action in terms of dealing with the rent freeze and the service charge freeze, because I think you've got an energy crisis, you've got an inflation, and it's going to be an increase in rent, and you've got food poverty. I think it's absolutely guaranteed that you're going to see in North Kensington huge deprivation, and the impact on that's going to have a massive impact on our community. We're going to see the impact on children at school. You know, I don't need to paint the pictures. I think, you know, this is very, very real, and we need to see, I think I would like to see some, a sense of emergency. I'm not saying you don't have a sense of emergency because I've just come into the meeting, but I think we need a real sense of urgency, because we have a fantastic range of voluntary sector organisations, and I think I want to support Ms. Councillor Simmons when she says actually we constantly hear of there's nowhere to store food, there's no environment, and so when Councillor McVeigh talks about actually having warm places, so we've hardly got any space in North Kensington to even have a meeting. I think that there's going to have to be a serious drilling down into actually freeing up vacant spaces to make this a reality, because there is a bit of a shortage of spaces in North Kent. So I think there's so many issues I think that that you're going to face going forward, and I hope that actually as a community, the North Kensington community can depend on the support of the council, so ready to see them through this difficult period.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Any councillors want to ask a quick question? Yeah.
Just to agree with you actually, Maura, because I think we do need to know that we can rely on the council's support for those voluntary sectors who, like you say, are doing the work on the ground. And you raise a really important point about storage space. From what I hear, I'm going to say the council has been less than supportive in providing storage space, and I just wondered whether it's because league members don't necessarily, because they're not on the ground, maybe they don't necessarily grasp that food needs to be stored somewhere, and some of it needs to be refrigerated too, and it needs to be transported. And I think, when you see organisations that are delivering really great service and doing it really well and really consistently, maybe it's easy to you don't see the wheels go around, and maybe it's easy to not realise what actually is behind that and what their needs are. So perhaps that's something that the council could take away from this meeting. Storage and transport for the food.
Councillor Dowden.
Can I say very helpful speech, actually. Particularly the normalising poverty. That's really hit home. Can I just ask, The access to information, which you said was crucial, what means would be best, or is it different means? What is the best way to get this information out to residents?
I think we all know that all communities are quite diverse in the way that they access information. Some people like a piece of paper, and I think therefore we need to have something in that format. We also need to have things digitally clear. I'm sorry to say, and I'm sure a lot of you won't disagree, that your website's a bit difficult to navigate. And so I think, yes, digital information is really important, and actually getting the same message to all the voluntary sector organisations so they can get it to their service users. Also put it through the GPs, put it through the library, put it through my day job at the moment is with the Grenfell Health and Wellbeing Service. You know, that's what we also see is people talking about on World Mental Health Day, their anxieties and really increased by a cost of living crisis in amongst everything else. So get the same information so when they see a client in front of them, they've got a piece of paper that says, here it is, this is the number, this is how you can get access or support, or even share the forms that need to be filled in, because sometimes there are people within these services who can actually help clients to fill the forms in. So I think as long as
Thank you. It's clear. Thank you very much indeed. Your input is much appreciated. Thank you. And that's why we have residents from first-hand experience to be here, not only to hear from senior officers and councillors, but also residents who directly be dealing with our community that's supporting. And to just recap, definitely we should not be normalising food banks, so poverty. A single household with families also needs to be check out to see how they are doing, and of course, the council to do more, especially rent-frees. And you mentioned housing is relevant because this is housing and communities. You're absolutely right for mentioning the support for the support. Yes, and energy space and space, freeing up space in Kensington and Chelsea, especially north of the borough, for storage space. I'll finally finish off before Councillor Sutton, you want to have a...
Oh, no, I just wanted to thank you, Maura.
Yes.
That was very, very insightful. And point taken about the voluntary sector. We do, as a council, support them to the tune of about £22 million. But that comes through, part of it through communities, only a small amount, 2 million through communities, and then the rest split between adults, social care and families. And actually tomorrow morning we're actually having a cross-departmental meeting with all the different commissioners to make sure that we are actually offering the right level of support to all the local community groups and making sure that it is getting what it needs to be.
Thank you.
But they do it with vision.
Thank you very much. On that note, we were moving on to Councillor Gardner.
Is this paper going to go to council or be shared with other councillors? Because I thought it was really useful, in particular the chart on the back.
We can definitely share with other councillors, yes, we will ask officers to share with other councillors for the future, because cost of living is obviously affecting every ward in the borough. And there will be definitely pockets of people who need support. So yes, thank you very much for that point. Officers will share with the rest of the councillors and senior council officers. On that note, we are moving on to the other agenda A5, revision of the council attendance strategy. Now I welcome to the housing team one more time. Probably two more times.
That's good to say, we'll come on more.
The following agenda will be rules as well. For the time being, Councillor Smith.
Really, I've got one for you, Koja. Sorry.
Yeah, there you go. All right, thank you very much. Any one of you can start once.
A very brief introduction, Mr. Chairman, just to say that obviously Canister strategy, it's a long time overdue. The last time we looked at this was 2013, so it's out of date and it needs an overhaul. We've listed within 1.4 the 6 principal objectives of this review. And that goes into more detail within the appendix, so I won't repeat on that. And really just to finish by saying the next step of this is consultation, which starts on the 2nd of November, runs for 6 weeks, with a view to then taking the paper to leadership in March 2023. So that's a very brief summary, but Kojo, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, so as Councillor Davis said, consultation is scheduled for the beginning of November for 6 weeks. The items that we have set out has been in discussion with the housing associations in terms of identifying their priorities. So that is why it's been laid out like that in terms of the 6 based on the 5 that were previous strategy. So yeah, that's the only thing I would add.
Thank you. Councillor Grickham, any further
Thanks,
questions?
Chair. I think building on Kojo, on your last point, I was going to ask you how much engagement you've had with the registered providers to get to this stage, how much buy-in you've had from them, and of course there's quite a lot of registered providers. Is there a spectrum of engagement and satisfaction, dissatisfaction, or complete silence, which one or two of them, well, I won't name them, but we know who they are. So where are we with the registered providers on this? And then I suppose on the same subject, of course, the registered providers, almost all, in fact all of them will operate across borough boundaries, multiple local authorities in most cases. How obliged are they to follow what we're saying in Kensington and Chelsea when they've got these London-wide, UK-wide portfolios?
Thank you, Councillor Hammond. So on your first point, we have we've actually got a strategic forum that we hold with all of the RPs in the borough, which is held on a quarterly basis. This is in the very early stages, so we have had conversations with them. We do know what their priorities are, and we have drawn up this list based on the conversations we've been having with them. We've got a specific officer designated within my service area who is responsible for liaising with the RPs, and she's been in post for about 2 years now. So this is a body of information we have been collecting over the last 2 years, and now we've got a formal arrangement in place with them where we meet with them quarterly. Most of the registered providers in the borough, including the so-called small in relation to your second question about how much do they buy into this, so there is a legislative aspect of it where there are things that they have to do. With this part of it, it's more about the relationship management, relationship building, getting them on board. Part of the strategic meetings is around actually holding them to account, and also them holding us to account about things which they think isn't working from the council's perspective. So a lot of this will be we're in the process of drafting a memorandum of understanding, and aspects of the strategy will be incorporated into the memorandum of understanding. So when we do have our regular meeting, if there are any aspects which they are not following, there's nothing we can do to actually mandate them, but because of the relationship we're building with them, and a lot of them are quite receptive, hopefully we can just build them and they will work in accordance with the things that they have set out, because as I said, a lot of these are their priorities in any
it's definitely a kind of soft power relationship. And it's important for us to be realistic and to manage all of our expectations, including yours, about what the kind of what the nature of the relationship is. And as it says right at the top of the report, these are issues which the RPs are required to consider when framing their policies, rather than required to completely comply with, because we just don't have that kind of relationship within the regulatory environment. On your question about the fact that they operate across different boroughs, that's of course right. My guess is that it would be very rare for there to be different tenancy strategies in different boroughs that would directly contradict each other. It's more about where different boroughs place the particular emphasis. Of course, you won't be surprised to hear that we place a particularly high emphasis on issues of health and safety and issues of kind of tenant and resident engagement. Those probably will be priorities in other places, but perhaps not quite as high as they are here. And similarly, where we are exercising our soft power with the RPs to try and get them to take account of the strategy, it might be some of those issues because of the particular RBKC context, which we want to particularly emphasise with them and hold them to account. So to the extent that we're using up our capital in the relationship with them, we may have to take some decisions about what our approaches are.
Well, and in terms of the spectrum of engagement with the RPs, of course, this committee has had an annual session with them, and it has become better attended, but not universally attended yet. I mean, are there, without necessarily naming them for this meeting, are there some RPs that you're having a particular problem with, a sort of a brick wall? There's one I can think of that seems to respond on Twitter, but when I embarrass them, but really apart from that.
So I've met with every single one of the RPs in the borough individually. I did that last year, and most of them were happy to be part of this forum, which I referred to. In terms of the ones who have the most amount of stock in the borough, those ones are definitely engaged. The ones who we have had difficulties with in terms of casework coming through by members, and those ones are definitely engaged and on board. And to be fair, there is a version of what we do in other boroughs, and they are keen for us to share best practice with those other boroughs who have had more long-standing established forums and incorporate that into the work that we are doing. And they accept that there are issues, I suppose, at the leadership level. They are quite interested in engaging the work that we are doing, and maybe sometimes on the operation level it's not necessarily filtering through. But part of this whole process is trying to get the organisations from top to bottom in line with what we're doing, and it is a work in progress.
Well, I hugely welcome the work you're doing, and Christine, the desk officer, and thank you very much for the explanation tonight.
Councillor Rossi.
Yeah, if I could just push this a little bit further. I mean, I understand that it's soft power, and I understand that we have no direct control over the registered providers, but we all get in our casework people coming to us with sometimes really quite serious problems with their registered landlord provider, whatever you like to call them. And I mean, part of the problem is people don't understand. They think it's council. They don't get the distinction necessarily between this is, I don't know, Notting Hill housing, or this is a council property. But what we often find is we are very limited in what we can do to help people. We can look up on the website, we can find the customers that we can write to people, but we don't have anything really that we can do to help our residents if they have a problem with a registered provider, because we can come to you because you can't really get involved. So I don't know what you think is the way out of it, because it is a problem. It's not really getting better. I mean, I understand that you're making efforts and all the rest of it, but is there anything we can do basically to make sure that registered providers actually sort of maintain a basic decent standard of housing provision for people? Is there anything?
So this is one part of the answer to that question, but it's certainly only one. I think I'm right in saying that most, if not all, of the RPs have particular channels of communication for councillors. So we have, and we can, I think it might well be due an update and a recirculation, perhaps we haven't done it since the election, for example. We have a list of how those mechanisms work for the main RPs that are active in the borough. And it's important that kind of all members have that, because
That would be helpful.
I think, as I say, for the most part, you shouldn't have to go through the regular customer service channel. There are certainly some of them have channels which are specifically for councillors. The other thing that's important for you to be aware of and for your constituents to be aware of is kind of how the formal complaint system works. So every RP will have its own formal complaint system, but then also the opportunity to take it to the housing ombudsman if they don't get a satisfactory answer from the RP. And again, although you're right, it's not our job to kind of take up each individual bit of casework. It's certainly our job to make sure you've got that information so that you can help constituents navigate that system, if that makes sense. And we can probably kind of refresh and recirculate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'd like to add on to what Daniel said is, towards last year when we had the floods in the night of the floods, there was some difficulties in terms of actually engaging with the police. But what I must say is the following day they were really responsive, and we did set out the concerns about that emergency response and the lack of availability, and even their own residents not knowing who to contact, or not knowing or not being able to get through. And through that process, it was unfortunate for those residents at that time, but through that process, you know, our contact list with them has improved, and we are just continuing that piece of work, because there have been a few things that's happened since then. But I now have direct access to the relevant people to actually get things moving. So, you know, as described, you know, there is an updated list and we can share that with you, but it is still a work in progress. I'm not contacting all things like that.
I also would really acknowledge the point you make about the confusion that residents can sometimes have about kind of council, particularly as it's quite often it'll be the council who will have nominated them to that RPO, so they still see, they still expect that they're not involved in the council. And I think I would also acknowledge the frustration that you have as elected members about this kind of asymmetry, where you have more power to intervene where the council is the landlord than where an RP is. And that is, I'm afraid, just an asymmetry which is kind of baked into the system to a certain extent, and we feel it too. And I totally acknowledge that you experience it at the front end of the casework. And we're never going to be able to make that go away completely. But as I say, there are some things we can do to at least help that system be as navigable as possible for you and the constituents.
Thank you. Councillor Simmons.
Thank you. I am aware that this is about policy and strategy, but I just want to raise a point about in Appendix 1, point number 3, the tenancy sustainment, homelessness, prevention and tenant welfare. And I know we've been talking about registered providers, but I believe this will also apply to RBKC housing management. And I know that Hoda and Dan, you're aware of some current casework that is quite alarming. And I hope that this strategy will, and this aspect of it, the top 5 points, can even maybe inform current working practices even before February 2023. Because following on from the cost of living item that we've just been talking about, I think this is going to be an increasing issue about helping people sustain their tenancies, because otherwise we have a revolving door and we are just inflicting misery, and we need to not be doing that.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, so this strategy is applicable to both the RPs and the council. So you're not taking your points.
Yeah. Okay, point number D, domestic violence.
Yes, so so in terms of domestic violence, we have as you're aware, the Domestic Abuse Act was implemented last year, and as a result of that, we did an analysis of the service and the type of service we are providing to victims of domestic abuse, specifically within housing needs. When residents approach how they access the service, I myself has responded to. There was one resident last year who emailed me about 11 PM, and I managed to respond to that straight away, and for that fact, he was able to go. But as a result of identifying the gaps, what we have done is we have recruited a domestic abuse coordinator that sits directly within housing needs, and she is analysing all of our policies, processes and procedures within housing needs. There's also a piece of work being done in those areas in housing management about how we interlink between housing management and housing needs for victims of domestic abuse. So this actually got updated over the last few weeks before it actually got submitted for scrutiny. due to the piece of work that's being done there, and there's going to be more work that we're going to be publishing as time goes in relation to the work that we're doing around domestic abuse and supporting vulnerable households.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
I would also say, just to mention this, and go back to this soft power point, it's going to be very hard for us to try and get RPs to live up to some of these points. I hope that won't mind me saying to some here. If we can't live up to them ourselves as a landlord, if you see what I mean, so we really have to lead by example. And, if we're saying these things are priorities, we're going to have to lead by example on them where we ourselves are.
Councillor Garner.
Thank you. I specifically want to look at Appendix One. So a lot of these things, you publish your statistics. So, for example, we look in 3. And also in 5, we talk about publishing a scheme, point of person, publishing strategy. What I always want to know is how often do you publish and how do you actually get people to be aware of who they contact? Because so often you tick the box, you send the form out, it's part of your tenancy agreement, that's it. Whereas actually the reality is we've lost that bit of paper or it's not there. So how often do we refresh, or do we want ourselves to refresh? And then secondly, tenant welfare. For me, I think it's also important to try and ask for a provision of outdoor play space or an outdoor space wherever possible. And I think it would be good if we could actually put that under number 3.
So in terms of reviewing and the publicity of it, as we develop the actual strategy itself, we will ensure that we've got a period review incorporated into the strategy, and a reasonable period because things change all the time. In terms of the publicity side of it, we're going to work with the RPs about how we publicise it, both across housing management and our RPs and themselves, and also we are planning on communication with our representative organisations because they are prospective tenants in either council communication or housing association properties. Sorry, Councillor, could you just remind me of what your last one was?
So, tenant welfare, provision of outdoor space or place provision where it's possible. So, to go under 3 for tenant welfare. Because we all know that it improves mental health and actually for kids trying to be outdoors and actually we could. Right. So I know within our borough we've discovered sort of hotspots that we've converted into, whether it's gardening, vegetable plots. Actually, we encourage providers to look at their own provision and say, actually, you know what, we could provide a play space, or we could provide outdoor space.
Just to say, just in terms of housing management, I mean, a state improvement programme, we've got to be very successful at doing that, where we're giving residents themselves money to look at the space that they have around their buildings, and they are using it to create gardens or exercise space, etc., etc. And I agree with you. I mean, we're always going to be faced with a challenge in this borough. We don't have an awful lot of extra space, although at the moment we have in the pipeline some. I think we've got a new square areas as well that we're looking to see how we can bring it to creative, because as you say, with people's welfare, it's important.
Go back to your question about, so just finish on that one. Go back to your question about publicising. We've deliberately come early with this. These are headlines. It's certainly not a finished strategy, and it seems to be totally reasonable to say that it might be helpful for us in the final strategy to elaborate a bit on what we mean by publish. How we expect people to communicate things, how we expect them to proactively inform and re-inform their tenants about the kind of rights options they've got. If you see what I mean, that's a point it might be quite healthy to expand on.
If you want to pick up on it, I actually struggle with what is a housing investment standard, and for example, in 2C, was disprepared broad enough. So I did feel that some of these were something narrow.
Yeah. So more information for you would be.
Yes,
absolutely. More information to come probably from the housing team housing needs and hopefully the housing market. I think Councillor Simmons first, and Councillor North.
Just a very brief one. In regards to the suggestion about provision of outdoor space and play space, I'm thinking of one registered provider in particular who has that as a policy, that for all of their new builds they include outdoor and specifically play space. And there's one in my ward where there are issues affecting residents concerning noise. Certainly Nottingdale, possibly the impact of trauma making people sensitive to noise, but that's not what people want outside their window. So I would suggest that maybe there can be some flexibility there. Imposing provision for play space is wonderful, or outdoor space. Imposing it, regardless of the impacts, is maybe there's a bit more flexibility that can be built in.
Certainly. I mean, going back to what Councillor Smith was saying about.
Well, we don't impose that, Claire. So all of
No,
our
I was
housing
talking about
schemes
the
are with
registered
consultation, so
provider.
it very
Yeah.
much is listening to what the residents would like
Yeah.
to see on their estate. In that, but I mean, generally speaking, people like to have space. But I accept what you're saying. If it's been used for basketball or whatever, I take the point. Yeah.
And I think anything that we'd be encouraging RPs to do across any of the points, we would want it to be consistent with the stuff that's set out in point 5 about resident engagement, so in order to reduce the risk of running into that.
Thank you.
Councillor North.
Yes, and really pleased to see that landlords are to publish tenant satisfaction data, so Appendix 1, page 32, number 5. How's that going to be? So are all councils going to be able to access to see the satisfaction surveys of the areas in their own wards? How's that going to happen?
The results, yeah.
At ward level?
Well,
That might.
I was going to say, well, we've got the ombudsman is now going to enforce this, which is I think a great, really welcome thing in terms of the provision of performance data that has to be published. How that's going to be published, I don't know if we've had a steer into what level of granular data you're going to get that from housing associations. I don't know if we've had.
Let's take that away. That's a good question.
It's per estate, so you can see what the satisfaction level is. And if there's one thing in the satisfaction of communication, and it's another thing, the satisfaction of running the estate, because we all pick up complaints about, oh, we're never told this, we're never told that. And then when you look into it, it's actually you've had brilliant communication. It's just interesting to see what people perceive as good or bad communication. And I think that'd be useful.
But overall, I mean, I really welcome the fact that RPs are going to actually have to disclose this information, because it also gives us an opportunity to benchmark ourselves as well. But these complaints and how you deal with them are very important.
Thank you. If there was another question, just wanted to finally mention how the relationship between housing associations and the council came about for those who are new to our group, our selected group. 2 years ago, nearly 2 years ago, right?
Two council years.
2 council years ago, that's right. 2 council years ago, we managed to come up with a strategy to actually see what can be done. Especially I was getting as a chair of housing community and the council, I think a lot of casework from housing associations, and housing associations were not responding to it. So everyone thinks the council is the problem at the time. Obviously, I'm not saying the council is not to blame. Yes, there are outstanding issues with housing issues, but we can get hold of that and culture. That was not a problem. The residents believed that this is the council issue, so we have to come up with solutions. So we started, thanks to Councillor Graham and Jerry, that panel or forum, I would say, for us. So we've done 2 years. Clearly, the soft power we're trying to exercise is not working. And 2 years on, we're not making any progress. So my suggestion from here is, as the chair of this committee, is for the lead member perhaps to write to the Secretary of State and have some sort of understanding between the councils. This could affect any council in London, not just us, and housing associations, because they have to be held accountable. They're in between. They're not council. They're not directly from the government. They just do their own rules sometimes. And I think what we need to do is to have that accountability, and that's what we're missing from the casework that we have been working on for the last 2 years. This committee has tried it. Clearly, it's not going anywhere because we can't get hold of it. I would suggest maybe perhaps the lead member to reach out to the Secretary of State for Housing Communities and to come up with a solution. because this is not a problem for all us.
I mean, first of all, I slightly disagree with you. I mean, we have resourced internally people to liaise with housing associations. So I believe that in terms of our activity, Kojo's given you an indication of what we've been doing going around. I mean, the greatest respect to your forum, I don't know how many times you met. I think, was it once? I can't remember. But so we have been lobbying. So I think the problems with housing associations are not just the operational ones of residents where they're not being attended to and they're going through to a call centre, etc., etc. Where again, we have the mechanics through our own ward councillors of lobbying. If we can give that information, that really is the only thing we can do, is bang up on doors and say, you know, you need to perform. I think the biggest worry I have at the moment is not just the operational side, it is they're all looking at an estate management strategy now. Now, we've been looking at buying council accommodation, you know, for our long list of people who are in TA accommodation. And we've been picking up housing associations who are selling housing stock because it's not economic for them to refurbishment. And that's a real worry, because that's going to deplete our ability to actually put people in. You know, I was at the the party conference last week, and my pet subject was housing associations and also new housing, because it's going to be a real problem for us. So I think that yes, I can write to the Secretary of State. I certainly spoke to the Minister with regard to what the problem was when I was there and lobbied. But I think it's incumbent on all of us and the ward councillors, you know, to be on their backs and to make sure that they perform. And the only way to do that is just keep banging at the door.
Yeah, I mean, all I would say is that, but I think if Councillor Taylor-Smith did write that letter, my guess is that the reply would say that post-Grenfell, the government has introduced a stricter regulatory regime through the regulator for social housing. It's just that those powers go straight to the national regulator, not via councils. Simply to the government have taken a decision that they want that to be a national regime enforced by a national regulator rather than enforced at the local level. It sounds like your preference might be for it to happen at the local level as well, or instead, and that's a legitimate debate. But I think the government would certainly. I don't say this as it were because I carry a torch for the government's approach, but they certainly have tightened the regulatory regime recently, precisely because they recognise some of the problems you're describing.
It's spot on, and the point is here. You've mentioned a couple of times that the soft power can't get us everywhere because we tried and we've been trying. So the point is, if you cannot enforce what the regulation requires, what is the point of having that regulation? So that is where I'm coming from. That's what this committee has been trying to come up. We certainly did not get what we want to after 2 years, and I think it's about time maybe the government and the relevant league members to have this discussion. This is wider than Kensington and Chelsea. It's wider for the London wide. I think it's not maybe the nationwide rather than just one council. So I think that point maybe to be further investigated and see what we can get to, because we need to support our residents, whether they are in council homes or resident association. And on that matter, we will move on from this agenda item. Thank you once again. If you remember, say the second agenda item is also used. We will continue with this A6 intermediate rent policy.
A very short introduction on this one. It is a short paper, thankfully. And this really is, I think in summary terms, a change in the narrative in terms of definition. For me, intermediate housing and rent to a key worker rent. So, and I know that this is something which we've debated about, the confusion that's caused when we use the word affordable.
That's right.
And it'd be lovely to get to a universal agreement in terms of what we have in terms of rental levels. On my book, I've got 4. We've got social rent. We've got key worker intermediate rent, which effectively is key worker and also TA. We then have this word affordable, which is a word used by developers, which reflects the fact that it's a discount to the final category, and that's market rental.
Thank you. That was short. Any other? Councillor,
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, well, just very briefly, the key thing is that in which is set out in the report. So in March, we introduced the key worker policy, and the intermediate rent policy existed before that. So it was actually out of date and not in line with the intermediate housing policy. So as a result of that, we've basically changing it so it doesn't have the factual inaccuracies that is in the current policy. So it's updated with more up to date.
Thank
That's
you.
set out in 75.3.
Thank you for that. And clearly, as Councillor Clinton has mentioned, this is the first time we have this discussion. And probably will be not the last time this waiver will somehow come back again. I somehow feel that. Councillor Gardner, please.
I'm a lawyer by training, and I think this is a shocking draft. I mean, I really, key worker housing is considered a subset of intermediate housing. That is not a definition. And what if you're putting that in as a definition, and then there are so many things where you look at it and you go, review at the end of the tenancy period. Actually, it's a review 6 months before the end of the tenancy period. We talk about a break clause. There is no reference in that section to break clause. All the way through this document, it actually just needs somebody to sit down with it and read it from scratch and go, is it following sequentially? So I appreciate, I then looked at your 2017 policy, and actually it was poor then. All you've done is you've just added some paragraphs, but the paragraphs aren't in the right places in some cases. But actually, it's just the rent clause is even less understandable than it was in the 2017 clause, policy. So I would say take it back to the drawing board and come back with something that follows sequentially, and happy to provide you with my comments.
Yeah, we can take that away. It's sorry. It has been
Yes, so it's sitting with legal now. So in terms of the other stakeholders who need to input into this, that's the stage that it's at the moment. So it's nowhere near a
Yeah, well, we'll take your comments away, and yeah, I'm happy to get information in relation to how we can set this to out.
Thank you, Councillor.
I just had a point of detail, which may be proofreading or my lack of understanding, but on paragraph 5.3, your instruction, you say you're removing the term head lease, which is no longer applicable for the specific context. And then paragraph 5.15 of the new policy contains a reference to the term head lease, and that confused me.
Sorry, Councillor.
Yes. So your introduction, you say you're removing the term head lease. This is the document you wrote, Kojo, introducing the report. And then in the draft policy document on page 41 of our meeting bundle, paragraph 5.15, the term head lease still appears.
Okay, that was.
So is it right?
Yeah.
Also appears in 512 package.
Does it? So it does.
Okay.
I must have been.
Thank you very much for
proofreading's not that good. Don't
Councillor Rose, did you okay? In that case, shall we say any other comments? Any other questions, members of the public? No. Any other questions? Do you have a question on this? Yes, please, Moira.
I stand concurred. It is. I was in a meeting a few weeks ago here on planning, and we tried to actually get council officers to actually be really clear on the question of affordable housing, intermediate key workers. I think it's incredibly confusing, and I just want to send a warning out that for many people we feel you're obfuscating this because for people who need social housing, and we need social rents, that's the need, the greatest need, that this has all been mixed up. And so we have no idea, with the 600 homes that have been built, out of all of those, are we going to get 5 that are actually on social rents because it's affordable, this, that, the other. So if somebody could give clarity so that the communities of North Kensington are clear, because that's where the need is greatest, that would be really helpful.
Mr. Chairman, if I were to say, on every single announcement we've made on our new homes programme, we've said we're building 600 homes with a minimum of 50% at social rent. So I'm very happy to record that in the minutes. And that's on the website, it's on every announcement we've ever made. It will be a minimum of 50%, but each of the individual schemes might differ in those percentages, but overall, the programme will be 50%.
That is on the record, 300.
300 minimum.
Minimum.
At social rent.
And social rents equal?
Social rent.
Council rent.
Yes.
Yeah.
What we call council rent.
Social rent.
So on the record, we will have a social rent and key workers and affordable and private rent.
Our schemes are mixed tenure.
Just want to clarify.
No, I'm just saying, our schemes, I'm trying to clarify, our schemes will be mixed tenure.
Okay.
And they will be mixed between overall 50% social rent, and the other 50% will be mixture between an open market and I will call the intermediate key worker.
So 300 minimum will be social housing on the record.
Yeah.
Is that clarifies for you? Half of those.
I'm going to
I know 50% equals.
Of course,
half.
no, exactly. Just to make sure that the point is not the affordable, the markets and so on.
So we still have affordable within this.
The other half.
No. I deliberately didn't use the word affordable because the affordable is the bit that confuses, because a developer's affordable is not affordable. That's why
It's not affordable in this borough.
So we're really narrowing down to 3. I put the other one in because that's the one that developers will use occasionally, but as far as we're concerned, intermediate, social and open market.
Social and open market, okay. I'll break it down. Just one quick question, also as a resident. A lot of us are really, really confused about what's accepted now. How long is it accepted that people remain in temporary accommodation? Because I can never get a clear answer from anyone.
Well, again, there will be some people that will never get council accommodation in RBKC. Because you've got 2,100 people currently in temporary accommodation, and tell me where we're going to get 2,100 homes from. So the reality will be that and this is part of our homelessness prevention strategy, that some residents will just not, in terms of priority, ever get to a point whereby they will have a priority of council. And with those, we need to make sure we get them into settled accommodation. The most likelihood would be private rental contracts, and that will be something we will be looking at doing. In terms of overall how long, it depends on the bedroom size. If you require a 3 or 4 bedroom accommodation within this borough, based upon the amount of housing stock we've got of that size, then it's likely to be 12, 15 years. On the smaller bedroom size, on 1 bedrooms, possibly 2 bedrooms, I think the average is about 8, is it? Yeah. I mean, you've probably got the statistics, we've got this in statistics, but the reality, and this is a particular thing I'm crusading, which everybody talks about in terms of social cleansing, is we have to find decent homes for people, secure, decent homes with access to services. Unfortunately, within this borough, we don't have the space for that. We can try and get it under developments that are coming into the borough from third parties, but it's still not going to deal with the number of people that want to live in this borough and the overcrowding that we currently have here. We just don't have the space. And if you want to point to the sites and the sites, then we'll obviously be very interested to have a look at them if they're economic. But the reality is, and this is another worry I have with the housing associations, is they're not building here anymore because the land that's here is so expensive, and it costs a lot of money to build a social home. Current build costs and land costs, even with the mayor grant, we lose money on building the 50% social homes they cost us money to do because the rent doesn't pay for the interest that we're having to borrow to do the building. It's simple economics. Sadly, true. And I think it's shocking, Margaret. I wish we could find out how to deal with that, but the only way is to take a pan-London approach to housing. I'd say pan-national approach managed housing and look at where we can build homes, secure homes with access to services for people. But the reality is that people will have to commute into RBKC because we're not going to be able to get them in the fund.
I'm trying to understand why, when I was housed in this borough, I was given a permanent tenancy agreement, and I had one child, and then I had more children, and basically if I choose to have more children, if I can get a bigger place, then I can, if I can't, I have to stay, but I have a permanent tenancy. Now you're saying to families, we'll put you in 2-bedroom, but with no temporary, so they have no security and they're overcrowded.
No, you're not putting people into overcrowded. Well, Kojo, you can explain.
You
wouldn't put people into an overcrowded home. I'm just giving you the reality of if somebody wanted to move because they're overcrowded now because they've had additional children. It's very difficult for us to find larger homes within the borough. We just don't have them.
So just very quick, just in terms of some data. So last year we had about 1,200 households approach the council for housing assistance provisions of the Environmentalist Act. We were only able to let 450 social housing homes via our housing register, and that's both for the council and for housing association properties. And this trend is one that happens every year, and it's not unique to RBKC, it's actually a trend across London. At the moment, there unfortunately is a housing crisis, and there's a shortage of there's a shortage of available social housing to put households into. There's also a shortage of temporary accommodation to put people into. So what we are finding is, unfortunately, more and more households are spending more time in temporary accommodation, who are awaiting, and these are the households who we've got a duty to. That's not even including the ones who are currently assessing to determine whether or not we've got a duty towards them. And I just quickly had a look at some of the waiting list data we've got, and on average, as Councillor Taylor Smith said, for 3 beds, the wait is about 8 years. So the conversations that we're having with a lot of our residents is around being realistic about the timeframes that they will spend in temporary accommodation, and even at the end of it, they may not get a social sector tenancy, because at the end of it, there may be more people waiting for this. So we're having conversations with people about moving into other forms of accommodation, whether that's private sector or moving, out of the borough or out of London. And there are some residents who are actually taking up that option. But at the moment, the demand for ours is supply, just quite difficult to rehouse people into social sector tenancies.
Going back to that word you used in question, I don't think any of us sitting here think that's acceptable.
No.
But it's the kind of awful reality of the
So then
situation.
my final question is, of the 600 homes, I'm glad you have the data and you've analysed, of the 600 homes or the 300 that are going to be, how many of them are for families? Or are they all for one bedroom and 2 bedroom?
No, we mix them. So it's not just families, it's also we have an acute shortage of disabled access. So we're trying to design them with ground floor level access TDA compliant. That again, we've got people who've got disability and need to have wheelchair access.
No,
so
I understand that, but how many of those are for families?
I don't have the breakdown in my head in terms of overall. We've done a mixture of schemes. Because again, part of the problem we could talk about. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. We could do this over a cup of coffee in terms of how it works, but the dynamics on it are more really complex. And also, we get the same level of grant on a 4-bed as we would do a 1-bed from the mayor.
Thank you.
So you might just
Thank
work
you.
on the 4
Thank you.
beds.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I think just to clarify that point, Dan, is there any chance you can, Moira, is there any chance you can provide details for the committee as well as for members of the public?
Of the bedroom size?
For the out of the 300, how many of them would be family size, meaning 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom?
I think we had that on the. I think we had that on the last paper.
Excellent.
I was going to say I might have it on the back of my thing, but
it was about a year ago that we last had the
absolutely.
paper, and of course we will probably do it again this year during this council year.
If
I'm
you,
sure. So
thank you. If you can provide that information, I think would be helpful to know. for the purpose of this meeting and for the select committee that may be interested in. Temporary homes was not part of this agenda item, but that I just cannot get rid of this question in my head. If you don't mind, Councillor Dennis Smith.
Yes.
Westminster, and this is also I do apologise in advance. Westminster is now looking at buying empty properties in their borough to accommodate.
We have a fund to do that.
Let me finish point.
Sorry.
Empty properties, and they are doing this to deal with homelessness. Is there a strategy for RBKC to do that? And I apologise, it's not part of the agenda, but is there a strategy in the long term to accommodate the acute homelessness?
Yes is the short answer to that. We had a fund which was approved, and we've got about 20 million of it left. We have been spending it on buying ex-council homes. And there is a strategy to do that. At the moment, we've only been doing that in borough. And that's something which we're going to look at as to whether or not, as with our TA accommodation, 25% of our TA is in borough, 50% of it is including the surrounding boroughs, just how we might do that. But there is that, and we're looking at various schemes and initiatives that will enable us to accelerate that beyond the fund that we currently have. Because, it's a nightmare having private rental accommodation with landlords wanting it back and also having to then deal with, it's like a housing association, you're having to do with repairs through a third-party landlord. If we can buy it and manage it ourselves, then that's a better thing as far as our residents are concerned.
Thank you. So we're looking at similar.
Well, we already have a scheme, and we're looking to extend that.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. That answers the question, which was not part of it, Councillor Carlton. If you don't mind, make it very brief.
Yes, I was just going to ask, given your comment that housing associations were looking to sell the estates, are we looking to buy any more? Is that too much?
We've asked them, so they tend not to sell kind of estates or blocks, they tend to sell individual
standalone properties.
And usually the ones they're selling because they're the ones which are in least good nick and the most uneconomic to operate. So although we do try to impose on them an agreement whereby, as it were, they give us first refusal, very often the reason they're selling is a reason that we probably don't want to buy them. But it's the right question to ask, and we make sure to ask it of them all the time, because even one or every little helps, and if there are some that they're going with, which we think can make use.
Thank you for bringing Councillor Gardner back to the agenda item for part of the meeting. For just to summarise this agenda point, I think we have a clear point to go back to the drawing board in terms of what Councillor Gardner mentioned, to give us, and what Councillor Hammond mentioned, not only to proofread of the report, but also to go back and give us data that's relevant to this meeting. So hopefully looking forward to this agenda item once more. And on that note, thank you very much again for taking the time. Final agenda item, A7, work program. This will be short and sharp. Any work program updates you need to prepare or anything else? Okay, what we have here is the next meeting is going to be the 1st of November, and we'll be looking at the fire safety, the repairs, maintenance, housing stock, and you will not be here.
I'm on leave.
Oh, you're on leave? Oh, well, that's
Sorry.
Well, enjoy your time. Enjoy your leave, and yes, it will be good to see a substitute for Dan will be here.
We'll be celebrating an England victory in their first World Cup game.
Oh, is it? Okay. Is it that? I got. Okay, that would be the hopefully the time we need. It's about time for England to win. It's a long time. So the ladies did it, so the Lions have done it. Yes, I've done it for us. So, Councillor.
I just had one point to raise under 3.2, where the topics and themes need to run for recovery. Bereaved and survivors' housing needs. And I just wanted to, as a councillor and member of the committee.
Okay, sorry, we haven't finished the meeting. This last agenda item. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I just wanted to bring to the committee a matter of urgent local issue concerning the commitment to rehouse residents from Lancaster and House.
And Bradley,
Yeah.
Okay.
Because the commitment was made by the council. And it's not being met, and the local items policy appears to be putting some people at a detriment of others as being affected. So I think we should have a look at that.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you very very much. It's been noted, Councillor.
Thank you.
And we will definitely take into account of this. Any other issues of the work program for next month? On that note, I thank you all for any other, before I move to agenda 8, any other reasons? No, thank you. Yeah. So thank you for that. Yes, most of the key decisions that will be relevant to housing and communities will be made end of the year. So as we get an update, the select committee will be informed, and hopefully we'll be able to have in time. There was a point where I had to write to the lead member, one of the lead members, to make sure that key decisions are made in time so that we could scrutinize, just like what we just talked about now. It's been raised before. Absolutely, Council Rosie knows about it. And we had this couple of years been happening, but thank God now it's been listened.
Is it getting better?
It is getting better, yes. Now at last for this one. So we're looking forward to those to be given right in time, so we can look into the more details and not only question the policy but also proofread if necessary. So thank you.
That's the treasure.
It's just once. Thank you once again, and the meeting ends now. And there's any other comments for your time.
Thank you, Chair.
Cheers. Thank you.
Anthony, you're walking home.
Yeah, I'll walk back with you, but I just want to say something to Karen.
Yes.
Someone else has already mentioned something about that.